Again, welcome all. My name is Christian Brock. I am the CEO for Elected Officials to Protect America. We are a nonpartisan group of elected officials, current and former elected officials led by military veterans who are working to address the global climate crisis. We've been pushing for a national climate emergency plan for several years now, as we've engaged with national and state officials to take immediate action to build a more resilient economy based, fueled by 100% renewable energy, enact policy that ensures environmental and economic equality, take action to invest in a just transition for our national workforce, and to ensure the protection of our national public lands and waterways. As many of us recently looked to the Biden-Harris administration and the action they've taken, such as on climate, such as rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and ending the Keystone Pipeline permit, we wanted to take today to highlight the actions and the leadership of local leaders on the front lines. And today we're joined by several of them from across the nation. I'm gonna introduce them now. We're joined today by Commissioner Caren Fitzpatrick of Atlantic County, New Jersey. We have a Vice Chair of the Wake County Soil and Water Conservation District, Jenna Wadsworth of North Carolina. Former Councilmember of Berkeley, California, Cheryl Davila. Councilmember of Carlisle, Borou, Pennsylvania, Joel Hicks, welcome. And also Councilmember Mary Lupien, if I said that correctly, forgive me if I said it wrong, of Rochester, New York, who is joining us today to express the work that they're doing at the local level to support and protect their constituents against the impact that the climate crisis is having on them, the nation, and specifically their municipalities. With that, first up, I'd like to turn the floor over to Councilmember Fitzpatrick to talk about the work that is going on in New Jersey and kind of how it ties to the National Climate Emergency Plan and the action that the administration is taking.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for having me here again today. It's always nice to be with this group of environmentally aware elected officials. Of course, the first thing I want to say is that I'm very passionate about this issue. Not only because it's necessary, because it's doable. It is doable to change our culture over to electric vehicles, and it's necessary. Rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement on the very first day of his term, President Biden set a new culture, a new way of thinking for America. Here in New Jersey, our Governor, Phil Murphy, is on the same page as President Biden. He's recently allocated $100 million in this year's fiscal budget to make it more convenient and easier for the public and private business to convert to electric vehicles by having tax rebates for personal car purchases. We have a big movement to install chargers in homes. People are able to get a 50% discount on the installation from their local utility in their homes. These are also for multi-family homes. Private business is also eligible for discounts like that. We're working on having electric school buses, sanitation vehicles. This all started with a lawsuit that the state of New Jersey settled with Volkswagen, and as part of their payment, Volkswagen is installing charging stations up and down the state of New Jersey. And in my experience, people have been reluctant to make this decision to go electric because they felt that they couldn't get as far in an electric vehicle physically as they could in their gas-powered vehicle. Now that electric vehicles are more sophisticated and you can go 250, 300 miles on a charge, you can get where you're going and get back home again. I think that the public is going to be a lot more receptive to making this change because we have to. I was on a call recently that showed the economic driver in Atlantic County is Atlantic City. Many of you may have heard of it. It's an island, and climate change and rising water levels affect us directly. And within the next 20 years, we're likely to have a 2-foot increase in sea levels, meaning that half of the island, the Atlantic City is only 5 miles long and maybe 6-8 blocks wide at its widest space. And half of that will be underwater, 2 feet. And it's mostly residential areas, what we call the back bay areas, not the ocean side of the island, but the other side where residents live. And at this time, even now in 2021, when there's a high tide combined with a full moon, children can't get to school because they can't get out of their houses. People have to navigate flooded roads to get to their jobs. So practically, in our day-to-day lives, this is an emergency for us. We can't wait any longer. So I'm really thrilled that President Biden is not just creating a handful of bills, but a completely comprehensive initiative that includes the Departments of Finance, Health, Education, Security, climate change, and the distresses that it causes can make us vulnerable to different types of foreign attacks or attacks on our grids and things like that. So I'm really happy to be able to take part in these conversations. I'm very pleased and proud that our governor has also made this a priority for our state, and we're looking forward to joining together and moving this issue forward so that we can take control of these changes and not be victimized by them in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome.
That's interesting and exciting to hear that the action that the governor has taken within New Jersey, and I think that will definitely lead the right step in the right direction. Excuse me, towards taking action to invest to improve our transportation, the state's transportation infrastructure.
Yes, absolutely.
With that, Vice Chair Wadsworth, you've been with us before, previous press conference we've had regarding climate crisis and the action and the impact that it's having on your great state of North Carolina. Can you expound on what you see as, hey, what's happening with the current administration and the positive, negatives, and any challenges you see going forward? Or what would you like to see more going forward?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Hello to everyone. My name is Jenna Wadsworth, and I'm proud to serve the nearly 1.2 million people who call Wake County, North Carolina home as the Vice Chair of the Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Supervisors. I also had the privilege of being the 2020 Democratic nominee for North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture, a campaign in which I prioritized addressing the climate crisis head-on while centering equity and justice for our Black and Brown communities who have faced the brunt of environmental racism and injustice for far too long, as well as developing opportunities to put our rural communities back to work and invest in their health and safety. And so I'm here today to speak in support of implementing a clean car plan nationwide, and I urge all of you to join in these efforts to help our country build back better. Affluent Americans right now are like kids in a candy shop, energized by a sugar rush when shopping for electric vehicles with a variety of high-end features to explore. Just yesterday, I actually did a ride along in a brand new customized Tesla Model S Long Range Plus with a 400-mile range. It was smooth and a quiet ride. The safety features would make any person swoon. The dashboard display showed if we were approaching a red light and notified us when the stoplight turned green. And if we were too close to a curb or another vehicle, we would be alerted. So the model that I wrote in actually has full self-driving capabilities and can even be summoned to pick you up. Now, I want you all to stop for a second and just imagine how this could transform security for transporting our children to and from school, how it could enhance accessibility and independence for senior citizens to get to their medical appointments and the grocery store without having to have a caregiver present, as well as prevent exhausted workers who are in danger of falling asleep during their commutes from becoming statistics. So we had to travel a few miles to reach a supercharger, but there was no wait once we got there. And less than an hour later, after a few games of backgammon on the heads-up display, we had a full battery for only a few dollars that was automatically charged to the card on file in our Tesla app. In the long run, this vehicle will hold its value while costing less in repairs and maintenance than a vehicle with a combustion engine. Even better, Plug-in North Carolina estimates that operating costs of an EV such as this one have a price tag that's 1/3 of running a standard gasoline vehicle over the same mileage range. Now, addressing climate change is a consumer option when purchasing a new vehicle, but let's imagine a future where it's the only choice. What does that mean for communities like the ones that we serve? Right now, transportation currently accounts for nearly 1/3 of our country's carbon output. The government is in the process of electrifying their vehicle fleet, but it's going to take all of us working towards this end in order to truly revolutionize our transportation sector and produce greener outputs. The reality is that most Americans can't afford a $50,000 to $100,000 price tag that comes with driving a new EV home from the dealership. And that's especially true after job losses and economic crises, which have been further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. To actualize our goal of realizing a more sustainable transit sector, we must center equity and climate justice in our plans. This means taking care of the communities which now find themselves on the front lines of the environmental justice movement because of years of having to bear the brunt of tailpipe pollution, unsustainable policies and a lack of governmental and private sector investment in them, limited and ever-dwindling access to good-paying union jobs, and the effects of gentrification encroaching upon communities of color while policymakers simultaneously prioritize access to downtown urban cores at the expense of lower socioeconomic areas, which are the first to be sacrificed for the development of new highways and interstate off-ramps. Here in North Carolina, Governor Roy Cooper signed Executive Order 80, which commits the state to addressing climate change and transitioning to a clean energy economy with a goal of putting 80,000 zero-emission vehicles, ZEVs, on the road by 2025. Our state Department of Transportation developed a ZEV plan with public input and has made the number of monthly registrations of electric vehicles by county publicly available, while working to make charging infrastructure more widely available, especially using that same Volkswagen settlement money for expanding EV charging capabilities in our rural communities. Now, the Department of Transportation plan here in North Carolina looks to educate consumers about EVs, increase affordability through green vehicle loans with credit unions and through financial incentives for consumers, dealerships, and original equipment manufacturer rebates, as well as encouraging the development of a secondary electric vehicle market. All that said, the groundwork for a greener future is already being laid in my state, but the pace of progress could be further accelerated with buy-in from the federal government. Under the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency, which will be run by North Carolina's own Secretary Michael Reagan, has the authority to set greenhouse gas emission standards for passenger vehicles and light-duty trucks. The Zero Emission Vehicles Act of 2020 in Congress would amend the Clean Air Act by requiring EVs and fuel cell vehicles to make up 100% of new passenger cars sold in the country by 2035. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's Clean Car Plan, which has become a part of President Biden's climate agenda, holds the promise of revolutionizing more than just our transportation infrastructure in this country. Supporting this initiative and making it law is both an economic and a moral imperative. Too many frontline communities live and breathe the reality of systemic environmental racism every day, due solely to their zip codes. Many are living in forgotten and underserved neighborhoods next to highways. And a national car plan to electrify vehicles, which includes substantial incentives for rebates and trade-ins for all income levels, will help ensure better health outcomes while delivering on the new administration's commitment to equity and justice for all. Because breathing clean air should be everyone's right. America can lead in clean car manufacturing, put people back to work, invest in communities, especially those on the front lines, prioritize public health, and build the future that our children deserve. Tomorrow won't wait, so we must get to work serving the greater good today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. A lot to unpack there. I mean, you address a lot of the initiatives out there, also some of the challenges and the benefits of moving forward with electrification of our transportation fleet or vehicle fleet. One of the questions that I have, and I know I'm a little premature on questions, is the thought about how local communities or local leaders are engaged in that, and how they can benefit from or even support the national climate emergency plan, and in particular how funds could be invested in those frontline communities versus similar with Commissioner Fitzpatrick's point that, hey, there's an infrastructural issue within Atlantic County where you need to, one, build up maybe the coastline or some barriers, and then the investment in charging stations. You indicated in North Carolina that there's similar action. I'd like to turn over to Councilmember Davila from Berkeley, because she had started an initiative, a community initiative led called the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force within the Bay Area, I believe, within California. So Councilmember Davila.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian, and thank you for having me here this morning on this beautiful California day on Ohlone territory. The Climate Emergency Mobilization is a task force that's composed of regional partners, coordinated coalition to organize the counties in the Bay Area and the 101 cities into a regional organization initiating climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. Our purpose is to advance economic and social justice goals in combination with the level of environmental and climate policies necessary to address our current state of emergency. And we emphasize preventing harm to human life and the environment through a just transition to sustainable regenerative systems. In the fall, or actually it started in July, we had a series of events all geared on climate. It was amazing. We had over 1,000 unique participants on the 5-part series from each. It was a month, every month from July through November. And the first one, it was sustainables and healthy cities. And we had a task force in July, or in August, we had one just dedicated to fossil fuel Bay Area, and green infrastructure, sustainable production and consumption resources. And then at the end of it in November, we had where do we go from here? And we've been analyzing all the information that we've captured from these 5-part series, and have been working towards consolidating that list and prioritizing it. And so far, risk bonds is one of the top priorities. And I also wanted to mention that before I left office, over a year ago, I put in an item to ban new sales of fossil fuel cars in Berkeley. And now that was finally seen at the council, not while I was in office, unfortunately, but they it did pass, and the city manager is tasked to come up with a draft ordinance referring the proposal. It was referred to the city manager and the city attorney's office to come up with a draft proposal. So we're working, and the timeline was for 2030. My timeline was a little shorter, but you know, but that 2030 works. So we have to do what we can to do and organize, educate, and get more people involved in this climate emergency that we all are facing. I mean, we all know, look what happened in Texas. Look at what's happening in what happened in California. We have to do better. We can do better. We must do better, and we will do better because our planet, our lives depend on it. And thank you again.
Thank you, Councilmember Dolan. And with that sentiment of doing better, I'd like to now turn to Councilmember Hicks of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania surged, with the latter half or the latter quarter of last year, got a lot of media attention. Different subject, but at the core of that is, Pennsylvania can lead the nation, or can be a leader in the nation that shifts the national conscience, the political will of the nation. I know you, in a discussion earlier, you kind of mentioned some of the actions and the things that you all are looking at as far as which is in your borough. Could you please expound on that with us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christian. Yeah, as you alluded to, Pennsylvania is a very diverse state politically, economically, and I'm squarely talking to you from the middle of Philadelphia, between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, which is very different in a lot of ways than our major urban areas. But I will say, as far as Pennsylvania needs to go, it's one of the least producers of renewable energy. Governor Wolf and other officials realize our future is eventually not going to be in fracking and natural gas, and we have to be leaders in incentivizing other forms of cleaner energy. And we are in the process of taking public comments for the regional greenhouse gas initiative so that Pennsylvania can be added to the collection of mid-Atlantic states that participate in that carbon pricing system. I hope that we can move forward and be part of that group within the next year. But I'd like to really echo the importance of local planning. And the Department of Environmental Protection saw that they needed to find ways to help, I would say, smaller, more rural communities actually plan on taking action on climate. And the Borough of Carlisle was a recipient of a really well executed program where Harrisburg was able to provide funding, work with a third-party provider called ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and partner actually local elected officials, their staffs, and university students and faculty to help do two things: to develop their greenhouse gas inventories so that they could have a baseline to do future planning, and to also assist them in developing their climate action plans, which the Borough of Carlisle is undergoing right now. And I also happen to be the chair of that commission. And it has ended up being our largest board or commission in our borough. So this has been a topic that I know the residents have been advocating for, and they're showing up, and that's the key. When you have anybody who's a local official knows when people show up, they care about that issue, and they are definitely showing up. And this initiative that Harrisburg had allowed in their first year, they allowed 20 townships and boroughs to actually develop greenhouse gas inventories and their own local climate action plans. And anybody who works in local government realizes one of the biggest barriers we have in governance is at the local level. We don't have the resources, we don't necessarily have the manpower to do all the things that we really want to do. And having just that little bit of extra assistance from the state government to get us going and to get all of these 20 townships and boroughs going really made a huge difference. There's a bit of a domino effect here, because as soon as we entered the program, our county, Cumberland County, sort of looked over what Carlisle's doing and said, we probably ought to do something ourselves. And so they actually became part of the next wave of local climate action planning. So that there's a growth pattern happening in central Pennsylvania where we're going to start being able to collaborate among local governments with our county governments, and really that starts to open up new pathways to do creative things involving school districts and really trying to advocate for sustainable centered businesses in our area. About 1/4 of all the goods and services that move through the United States come within a 1/4 mile of our borough. So we care very much about the I-81 corridor has 2 exits in Carlisle. So that is a very significant part of our environment. About 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from transportation. And light duty vehicles are always going to be important, and that's a big focus that is a priority. But we also need to keep our eye on the fact that even though large trucks are only 1/4 of our total transportation, they actually exceed the number of greenhouse gas emissions that light duty vehicles have. So we have seen some great progress on initiatives at the federal and state level on light duty vehicles. We need to continue that momentum to really focus on, I would say, one of the biggest challenges is updating our large vehicle fleets. And I think Carlisle and Cumberland County can be a leader in that. There is no county, and I would contest, in the United States that has more invested in large trucking than Cumberland County. And we're just at the beginning of figuring out how can we work to transform that area. I'll just say, I think our focus when we're writing our climate action plan is squarely on the co-benefits of changing to less carbon emitting emissions. I mean, when you start talking, as we all know, about the direct health, human health costs of criteria pollutants, the reductions of those go hand in hand almost in every sector with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We see just the co-benefits in having a more quiet neighborhood. If anyone's been around more than 2 or 3 EVs, they realize that the only sound they're hearing are from the tires on the roadway. And that in a historic town like Carlisle, that means something. That provides a little bit more of a attractive community, and we think we're really going to see some benefits as we start to migrate. I'll just conclude by saying, we have a long way to go. We started from really nothing, and we have no publicly available charging stations right now in a borough of 20,000, and that's not acceptable. And we are looking at the best ways to do very soon to make sure that people in single family homes, but not just single family, in multifamily homes, in the large number of row houses we have to be able to plan that out. And that's why that can only be done at the local level. State and federal governments have a huge responsibility. Local government is a huge deal. You have to plan for it. We have a lot of multifamily housing. We have a lot of row housing. And we have our utility companies are part of our commission. I requested they be on our commission, and they provide a representative from the electricity and the natural gas utilities are at the table. And I don't think we can be successful unless we have we're frank, and we bring them to the table to help them be part of the solution. So thanks for having me be part of this. First time me being part of this, but I'm really heartened to see all of our veterans and national security minded people taking part, because this is a national security issue. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. As you mentioned, one community or one small local government can be the catalyst for a larger effort, and that's really one of the principles we've built on as a network, is to be able to share and collaborate, exchange ideas and policies that have worked in one part of the country that may be adaptable in another. And we saw that as a missing piece amongst elected officials. Obviously, you can kind of get caught up in some of the local issues. But I wanted to highlight Rochester and Councilmember Lupien, in that Rochester is classified as certified as a climate smart community, and the 50th clean energy community. Councilmember Lupien, can you talk to us a little bit about what Rochester has been doing and how you're leading in New York?
Sure. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I just must first acknowledge that my community is suffering right now and struggling to understand how our justice system failed the family of Daniel Prude, who was killed by police. And as the AG returned her result yesterday with no findings in the case against police officers. And so I especially appreciate hearing Vice Chair Wadsworth's comments and her call to center Black and Brown lives in the climate justice movement. So I'm excited to offer my support for the Clean Cars for America proposal, and grateful to Senate Majority Leader Schumer and President Biden for their leadership in introducing this bold and historic plan to shift from gas-powered to electric vehicles. The Clean Car Plan will enhance and accelerate Rochester's already robust efforts to convert its governmental fleets to electric vehicles and install more charging stations in frontline and underserved communities. The city has already installed 4 municipal fleet charging stations and 36 public charging stations throughout the city since 2017. In addition to our municipal efforts, this plan will aid us in increasing the effectiveness of our public outreach campaign to promote adoption of electric vehicles. Through the Rochester EV Accelerator Program, we develop innovative public-private partnerships to create a comprehensive EV ecosystem and promote ownership for individuals, families, businesses, and commercial fleets by demonstrating all of these social and economic and health benefits that communities can reap by increasing adoption of electric vehicles. Access to vehicle ownership in Rochester is an equity issue. Our area is highly segregated, and most need a car to have a decent quality of life. In the 50s, like many cities, Rochester adopted policies to phase out robust public transit and remade their infrastructure to favor cars. This sprawl, caused by the racially motivated exodus from the city to the suburbs, facilitated by these new highways, has resulted in most jobs being located far away from where people live. And our transit system doesn't provide adequate coverage or frequency of service, and it can take hours to get to where you need to go, if you can even get there at all. Making electric vehicles affordable is one solution to this problem. The cost of owning a gas-powered car can be over $10,000 a year, and electric vehicles cost less to operate and maintain. And even without the discounts in this plan, owners save more than $10,000 over 15 years by making that switch to electric. And with the significant trade-in discount and rebates for low-income families, it's estimated that by 2030, electric vehicles will cost $7,500 less than gas-powered vehicles. This creates a real path to electric vehicle ownership in communities like mine for low-income families, and will increase access to jobs, grocery stores, recreation, school, and more. And low-income communities and communities of color have experienced disproportionate impacts of tailpipe pollution on their economic vitality, health, and quality of life. And investing in zero-emission transportation will help address this disparity and save thousands of lives every year in frontline communities. This plan will also create thousands of jobs, helping our economy recover from the pandemic by incentivizing manufacturers to build and retool factories to produce zero-emission vehicles. Green jobs are good jobs, and increasing the number of well-paying jobs in American-made and assembled vehicles will have exponential benefits to our community's well-being and our economy. But most importantly, the Clean Car for America plan will significantly lower US emissions of dangerous greenhouse gases. By 2030, it could take 63 million gas-powered cars off the road and lessen our carbon footprint by 20%. COVID-19 is just the latest disaster that has demonstrated to us how vulnerable we are to nature. It's imperative that we take bold and swift actions to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, to ensure a livable climate and a chance at a future for ourselves and our kids and our grandkids. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Lupien. You all have brought up several great points about initiatives for electrification, some of the challenges that the community is facing, the impact that climate change is having on your specific communities or your constituents. We have several questions I want to get to, but before I do, I want to highlight just something here to kind of set the tone of conversation. Recent research looking at both California, Massachusetts, and I think a few other states have declared that by 2035, they're phasing out of the sale of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035. My little background in business and understanding car manufacturing, that seems like a long time horizon, but in most cases, that is a projection from which car manufacturers can kind of recoup their investment in developing whatever new models that they have coming out. Given this kind of objective, which seems a little ambitious to include Massachusetts specifically, under a legally binding agreement, says they're pushing to reduce their state carbon emissions by 45% less or lower than the 1990 emissions levels. That is pretty ambitious. At the local level, if you can express, at the local level, how can local leaders contribute to that? And what is it you as local leaders would need from our level of government, state and national, to help you implement some of the things that would take that it will take to get to that level, to some of those objectives within your respective states?
I'll go. New Jersey has a goal of reducing the number of gas-powered vehicles on the road by 330,000 by the year 2025, 4 years from now, and reducing emissions 80% below 2006 levels by 2050. So we have the leadership, we have the goal. Now we need to have some help in making that transition practical for working families. To make the transition from fossil fuel combustion engines to electric vehicles. So I think we're getting there with financial assistance, but we need, nobody wants to be first, in the local scene. So we need people to make the leap and then show us how they're making the leap and making it work. And as a local leader, I definitely will say that I keep cars a really long time, but when my next car comes up, it's definitely going to be an electric vehicle because it's practical and it's the right thing to do. And it's what we have to do in order to at least stabilize our situation. So we need leadership to take a stand.
Councilmember Davila, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, COVID-19 brought out so many things that we thought was never possible, right? It cut down on the air traffic, it gave us free transportation for some time. And I think that is something that should be expanded on free transportation with in the Bay Area, it's the AC Transit. But all the transportation was free and you could go. And now, unfortunately, a lot of people lost their jobs at the ticket takers at the toll booths. but now you can just zip through and you get a thing in the mail. So, I mean, we came up with alternative ways because of COVID that I think should be explored and maintained so that we can reach these goals and everyone can benefit.
Anyone else want to add to that question? If not, I have one. It says, what is some? Can you speak to some of the unique, challenges of electrification in some of the isolated parts of America? What are the potential areas for charging stations that are few and far between?
I'll jump in and just say I think there's a complete the opaqueness of how the utility companies are actually incentivized to contribute to the EV charging station is providing a barrier. I'll just say I got some blank stares when I asked our utility company PPL, what's your master plan for electrifying and providing charging stations for what I predict will be an EV penetration by 2030 of at least 30 to 35%. The response I got was blank stares. And it's not because PPL doesn't have something to gain from putting charging stations, say, right by their light posts that they provide to us. I mean, that's a very cost-effective option, but I will just say, I think the policy opaqueness is a big barrier, and we need to be working with our PUCs. We need to be working with our state officials to bring down the barriers to allow those who are going to implement the solutions, whether those are third parties, energy service companies, whether those are the utilities. We have to make it clear about where, what their relative opportunities are. And I think that's the best thing we can do in Pennsylvania, at least.
Anyone else on that one?
I'll just jump in to say too, with our state's plan for zero emission vehicles, there is an emphasis on getting buy-holder from various stakeholders, including municipal electric utilities, electric cooperatives, and our state's utility commission, and making sure that we can establish electric rates that prioritize charging of EVs during times that would be beneficial to the grid as a whole. So what you would think of as off hours. And in addition, there's also incentives in a plan to move our state vehicle fleet into zero emission vehicles in the next couple years. And when I think about the acceleration or opportunity to accelerate access to EVs in rural areas, a lot of our state government operations are located throughout our state, including in rural communities. And by electrifying our vehicle fleet, that thereby creates a demand for enhancing electric vehicle charging capacity in these rural communities. So making sure that we have a comprehensive approach, in addition to also talking about rebates for trade-ins that make it more affordable for disadvantaged or socioeconomically disadvantaged and underserved communities in order to be able to purchase electric vehicles or even resale of electric vehicles, and creating that secondhand market.
Another question from our participants is, given the geographic diversity of the panel here, what do you see as the most pressing action the federal government can take or should take to help your very different regions achieve cleaner air, climate resiliency, and environmental justice? Pretty broad one.
I'll say 4 words: a national clean energy standard.
Awesome.
I agree. We need one message, a unified message for the whole country, and then we can figure out how to make it work in each of our areas. But we need to have one standard leadership.
Well, that ties great to the next question of are you concerned with any spillover or pollution from one state to another, as maybe some states don't come in or current in the current situation without having a standard, a national standard?
I would say absolutely. We are one country, and what we do in New York, has an effect for us in terms of pollution. But we have to come at this as a unified body, and that national standard is going to go a long way to do that.
I would also just echo that by saying in states like mine in North Carolina, where a significant portion of our economy is reliant upon travel and tourism dollars, and you see a lot of people coming in and out of our state, especially with our beautiful mountains and our beaches, our Crystal Coast, our Outer Banks region, you see a lot of vehicle traffic. And so I think it's particularly important to talk about smart and sustainable investments as we move forward. And that's why we have to work regionally. We have to, build transportation corridors, and we have to also have a national plan in place in order to truly make our goals possible and to truly realize a cleaner, more energy independent future for all of us.
We'll kind of combine the next two questions here and wrap it in kind of what we're experiencing. Many of you expressed, we're still dealing with a global pandemic and a depressed economy. Many folks are still without, good paying jobs or out of work, and will be seeking, even as the country vaccination rate goes up, will be seeking employment. How do you see, or what path forward do you see is kind of thinking of our post, if you will, post COVID economy, and how the transportation sector may be transformed, not just in electrification, but the reduction in the need? I mean, most of those who have been capable had employment opportunities where they were able to work remotely. Have you, in your own cities, considered how that changes the future of work, if you will? Probably stumble over that question so much that it's confusing to you, but
well, if I understood you correctly, I think it's a really important question. We're near I-81, and of course, there's no one is ever satisfied that there are enough lanes on I-81, but this is true whether it's 270 or 495 in DC. I think this is a good opportunity to have us pause on considering any sort of corridor widening projects, because I don't think we really know what the outcome is of what we learned from COVID in terms of working at home. My suspicions are that we really should be advocating for those who have the luxury and opportunity to work at home to do so. I think the benefits to the public are probably pretty clearly positive. To the degree we could maybe do so to the extent we don't have to expand roadways and convert those potential public funds to other more useful ends. I do hope we don't miss this opportunity to really work with the public and private sector to where possible have people work at home if they want to, and I think that can be a positive thing. I think we still have a lot of data we need to mull over, but I'm optimistic.
I also think that with automated driving, that with more folks staying at home, it could potentially pull more cars off the road if we're able to share those vehicles. So it's not sitting in your driveway all day. It can actually be working out, going and picking up other folks.
Awesome, that's a great point. Great. This question for Councilmember Hicks. You mentioned that the climate crisis is a national security problem. It threatens our national security. Given your military experience, the question is, the military has a large carbon footprint. are the armed forces doing enough, in your opinion, that are leading in the way of trying to decarbonize their transportation or their vehicle fleet? And if so, what would you like to see from a national security standpoint, the nation do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hear that a lot. No, they're not doing enough. Yes, they are leading the way, and yes, they need to do more. I will sort of distinguish the challenges in the armed forces sort of being operational versus land-based. And I will say sort of at the land-based level, the U.S. military, Department of Defense has made actually extreme progress, maybe more so than your average regional or local government. And it's a little, the Department of Defense can be a little bit more agile in terms of enforcing rules. And we've seen that actually, we've seen huge reductions in consumption for all of our deployed troops, both stateside and overseas. So I would give our Department of Defense maybe a B plus on that end. On the operational end, okay, the DoD is the largest consumer of energy in our country. They're going to have to be the R&D lead on biofuels. And I think we need to invest more in research to make sure that those combat systems that rely on high energy fuels have an option that is make sure that their operational readiness is as high as it is. But I think in sort of that subset of in energy requirements, I see the DoD being the leader and really getting us to cost-effective biofuels. So I hope to look forward to see more action on that end from our labs around the country.
One last question. Obviously, President Biden is, a lot of his nominees for cabinet positions are being confirmed or going through the confirmation process. Jenna, you mentioned Administrator Reagan has been for the EPA. He has clearly stated that he will make climate crisis a priority, or addressing the climate crisis a priority of his time in the administration. What would be, if you had his ear, what would be like the thing you'd say, hey, you need to tackle this immediately? What immediate action would you like to have him take?
Well, I think very highly of Secretary Reagan. I've had the opportunity to speak with him and interface with him a number of times here in North Carolina when talking about how we go about creating a comprehensive strategy to address the climate crisis head on. I would love for him to, in his new role as EPA Secretary, to center equity and environmental justice, especially for so many of those frontline communities which continue to bear the brunt of environmental racism and injustice throughout this country. But personally, I would love for him, as someone who comes from North Carolina, a state whose leading economic industry is agriculture, to also think about how the agricultural industry can play a major role in transforming a greener economy, a greener future. In particular, an area of emphasis for me is looking at the ability of hemp to replace plastics and other fuels. Most folks don't realize that in the early 1940s, Henry Ford actually produced an entire vehicle based off of the cellulose fibers that came from hemp and wheat. And so entirely renewable. It also ran on hemp oil-based fuel. And so, then we saw kind of what's happened to the fight with hemp and cannabis throughout this country, again, also centered on environmental racism and injustice. But we have an opportunity to truly support not just American manufacturing, American tech, which, by the way, are two huge industries in North Carolina as well, but talk about using what our farmers are producing day in and day out and benefiting from their hard work in order to truly revolutionize our economy, create good jobs, and become a truly energy independent nation. So I just, the possibilities are endless. We just have to make sure that we're talking to each other, we're coordinating with one another, and we're being creative in how we tackle some of the biggest issues that we're all facing.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. But thank you all. I could spend hours talking to you and discussing these issues and learning more about what you're doing in your respective communities to lead this fight. But I also recognize that you are elected officials and that you have busy schedules. So thank you so much for taking time. For those in our audience, this kind of concludes our press conference. Thank you. Apologies if we didn't get to all the questions, but if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to our communications director, Ramona Cornell DeHoo, at ramona@protectingamerica.net with any questions or follow-up requests, media requests. Thank you all.